Today, our speaker is Jeff Thomas. Really excited to have Jeff with us today. Jeff is the founder and CEO of Archetype Wealth Partners. Before that, he had 25 years experience working with the biggest names on Wall Street. He has written a book that I recommend to you. It's called Trading Up, Moving from Success to Significance on Wall Street. And a lot of what he shares in this book will be some of what he shares with us today. Jeff, like all of our speakers, is engaged broadly in the community throughout Houston and beyond. And so it is really my privilege to welcome our speaker for today, Jeff Thomas. Jeff, there he is.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you taking time. Hey, Jeff, I know that a lot of guys out there will know you already. You've been in the community a long time and been engaged in lots of different things. But for those who don't, just give us some of your backstory, right? Tell us about your family and your faith and where you've been, what you've done, that sort of thing.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody, for letting me share with you today. A little backstory for me. I grew up in St. Louis. My father was a business guy. Maybe we'll talk a little more about that in a second. Who went back to seminary and became a pastor. And my mom was a teacher and played a lot of sports as a kid, and ended up going to Trinity University in San Antonio for college. So that got me to Texas. So, you know, a lot of us are transplants, right? So we got here as fast as we could to Texas. And after Trinity, had a business degree there, accounting and economics, and ended up moving to Houston with probably 100 other people in 1990 to work for Arthur Andersen in the audit department. Of course, they had audit, tax, and consulting. And so worked there for a couple of years, and then made my way to the Wall Street firm, Payne Weber at the time, now owned by UBS. So I was in the compliance department there for a couple of years, and then got on the advisory side of the wealth management business in 95. And then, as you said, really 25 years total in those big Wall Street firms. The last stop before Archetype was Morgan Stanley for 17 years, and then launched this firm a little over 3 years ago, and it's been a fun ride.
Oh, that's great. We look forward to hearing more about it. Yeah, that's good. So you mentioned your dad just a second ago, and so I had the opportunity to read your book in this last week, and I really do recommend it. It's worth the read, man. And in it, you refer to your dad. I love this, especially as we're just coming off Father's Day. You refer to your dad as the best all-in believer that you knew. And tell us what you meant by that, and what you saw in your dad, and how, if any ways, that your idea of what it means to be all in maybe has changed over the years.
A great question, Tom. The way I look at that is my dad, you know, he was an engineer. You know, he was the youngest of four boys. His father had passed away when he was 8. And, you know, all of his older brothers went off into the military to really just, you know, escape poverty, basically. And he was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to the University of Cincinnati on a work study program, and was a mechanical engineer, and then went to Purdue and got what was then sort of the MBA for engineers, and went to work for International Harvester and was designing the engine for the Scout. For all you older people, that's like the first, they remember it. It was kind of the first SUV. And so he was living in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and doing that. He kind of had the upwardly mobile business job, and everything was going great. And then his pastor, he and my mother got married right out of college, and his pastor at the time came up to him, and the way I tell the story, Tom, is that the pastor probably asked every 20-something person in his congregation, "You ever thought about going into the ministry?" You know, and my dad, he finally got one to bite. My dad said, "Actually, I have been thinking about that." And so my dad went back to seminary at the University of Pittsburgh, or Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, I should say, and ended up taking the pastor route. And so I really always respected my father for really kind of chucking, if you will, the upwardly mobile, all the things that come with that, material comforts of being in the business world and just dedicating himself to being a pastor in a church. And so, he, as you say, I did think of him as my prime example, but you asked about the way that changed for me. And over the years, and I think we'll get into this a little bit, I had a little bit of wrong thinking. And I think because he was my model in my head about how you're all in for God, I kind of thought that, okay, well, I didn't feel called to be a pastor. I felt called into the business world. So I guess those of us that are in business, like most of us, on this call today, I guess we're just supposed to support the people that are really doing the heavy lifting, but I thought, I really didn't think we were doing the heavy lifting in ministry in the business world. I really thought that was the professional pastors and people that were missionaries and that kind of thing. The rest of us, make some money, support them, be good people, show up at church. But that changed for me eventually, understanding that we're all in ministry, even in the business world.
I love it. And there's like this incredible kingdom value to a marketplace relationship. So, yeah, I love that.
Exactly.
Yeah, good, man. So, as I mentioned, reading your book, you get a sense of the way that things have unfolded in your life, and of course, down the center of that is your business life and your spiritual life. But it seemed like there was a series of sort of ahas or defining moments or moments of great impact that gave rise to that idea of moving from success to significance. Just take some time. Tell us like how that unfolded, what those were, any of the things that seem real important to you today.
I'd say there were kind of three aha moments during my career, and I'm kind of an obsessive person about business, and so sometimes to the chagrin of my wife. But so my aha moments largely related to my career, and I was just as I told you, I was an old tennis player, and I loved singles, not so much doubles. And so when I got on the advisory side of the business, I mean, they kind of give you a computer and a phone and, knock yourself out. And they would give you, Payne Weber at the time, they would give you this personality test that was basically, I asked the branch manager that hired me, I said, hey, how should I answer this? Are they looking for a particular personality? And he said, he goes, you play tennis. Look, just answer it like a singles tennis player would answer it. All they're looking for people that they can drop on an island with a phone and you'll build a business. And so I said, okay. And so he told me later I got the highest score, if there's such a thing on a personality test, that he'd ever had, only because I just answered it the way I was kind of wired, actually, and the way he wanted me to wire, to answer it. And so I really just put my head down from 95 to 2005 and just built a business and did financial plans for people, invested the money. I even thought of it kind of as my flock, kind of like my dad. I think most pastors can maybe have 100 families that they really pour into, or at least know what's going on and know their names. And that's kind of how I looked at it. I'll get my 100 clients, but I was obsessive about it. And of course, just like in sports and certainly tennis, there was always this hierarchy. Every day at the firm, they would publish the leaderboard of the highest producer to the lowest. I was like, oh, okay, I get this game. Okay, there's only one winner of the tournament. All right, let's go. And I'm a little hyper competitive. And so just started working my way up that leaderboard and, pulled the team after 8 years at Payne Weber, pulled the team over to Morgan Stanley in 2000 and just kept grinding it out. And I got to about 2005 after 10 years in the advisory business. And I thought, well, okay, I'm kind of at the top of the leaderboard. This is all great. I got more money than I ever thought I would. Why am I miserable? Isn't the winners supposed to feel great? And I really just, the first aha moment for me was actually a feeling of dissatisfaction with what the world told me to do. This is what we're supposed to do, right? This is the one with the most toys wins, and you're supposed to work hard and get to the top of the American dream, and everything's gonna work out great. And so even though my marriage was in decent shape, a bit of a workaholic, but the kids were healthy. I've been married for 20 years. Got two great girls. They were healthy. Everything's wonderful. on the surface, I felt a lack of meaning in what I was doing. And I just didn't know why. Honestly, I had no idea why. And maybe some people listening today kind of have that little nagging feeling today. And so I thought, well, okay, I was raised in the church, but I was kind of embarrassed, Tom, I felt like I kind of had a second grader's knowledge of the Bible. You know, you go to Sunday school and they got the little stories but I never really studied it. And I thought, well, maybe the Bible has some answers. I mean, my dad, dedicated his life to this thing. He's got a doctorate in this stuff. And here I am feeling like a second grader about it. But actually, before I started doing Bible study, I read some books about, is the Bible even true? I was in my mid-30s and I thought, I'm 51 now. I thought, I don't even know if that book's true. Do I believe it for myself, or do I just have this faith because I was told to go to church every Sunday? And so I started reading books about whether the Bible's even true. And my favorite was The Case for Christ. I'm sure some people on this call have read that. That just really helped me. Heck, I got about 2/3 of the way through it, and I'm like, Uncle, it's true. Okay, there's so much evidence that the Bible is true. It's just overwhelming. There's so many witnesses that saw Jesus die and saw him resurrected. It's just hard. That's the fundamental truth of Christianity. And if that happened, then the rest of it's got to be true. So that sort of legitimized it for me. And so I just started going, okay, well, maybe this Bible has answers for me. And so I got into Bible Study Fellowship. And look, one of the things I love about Toolbox is there are ways to get involved. And Tom, I know you'll talk about that at the end. Yeah. But just getting in a Bible study, and I'm kind of a process guy, so they would give us homework, a little bit of reading every morning, and then get together as a group and do some teaching on Monday nights. And man, I finally, that was 7 years of that. And after just a couple of years, I started kind of seeing how it all fit together, and my problem was revealed. So my second aha moment was really through Bible study. And you know how, for those Bible study people out there, different verses can kind of hit you at different in different ways at different times in your life, depending on what you're going through. It's really a living document. And for me, God knew my problem was, chasing materialism and looking for that to give me satisfaction. And that's not what I would have told you. I just had this nagging feeling of, is this all there is? Something was missing. I wouldn't have described what it was, but my aha moment from Bible study was, Matthew 6:24. It's a couple of different places in the Bible, but it didn't matter what I read. This is just probably the best verse for me on it. It says, no one can serve two masters. You can serve God or money. And so everything I read, Tom, was about stewardship. Like, hey, Jeff, I've just felt like God was just every week just saying through his word, you're chasing money. You can only serve one master. And isn't it interesting that in the Bible, he says it's either me or money. He knows money is number one in competition for our hearts. And I had fell victim to that competition. And so, through that was kind of my second aha moment. So I do all this study, and then I get so excited. I'm like, holy cow. My wife and I started giving more money away. I started understanding that I was a steward, not an owner, and it just freed me up so much. Made me a better investor, made me a better husband. Like, I was keeping all that weight on my shoulders and trying to succeed by the world's standards. And really, it just released it where God's in charge and I'm just a steward, and let me just show up, take orders in the morning and do the best I can. So it just revolutionized my personal life, but my business hadn't been revolutionized. And so I was praying a lot about this. I said, okay, God, this is so helpful to me. I just feel unburdened by the world's pressures. And I felt him saying, okay, now share this wisdom with your clients. And I remember thinking, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to tell them that their money is not their money? That's probably a terrible business idea. And so I remember marching into my branch manager's office and saying, hey, God's telling me to tell everybody that their money actually isn't their money. Sounds like a terrible business idea. If my business completely erodes and disappears, well, at least you know why. And he's like, well, thanks for sharing. What am I supposed to do with that? But it was, of course, the reverse happened. God's just been so generous. And I know we'll get into maybe talking about some mentors, but he just brought me all kinds of people in my life that helped me learn how to communicate better with clients. And then over time, things got better. And I'll just tell you one story, kind of the third aha moment was through that process, I heard about an organization called Kingdom Advisors. Mm-hmm. And Peter Forbes, who's in the Houston community, he might even be tuning in today. He revealed to me National Christian Foundation, Kingdom Advisors, Generous Giving, all these sort of things. But Kingdom Advisors is a nonprofit that really helps financial advisors deliver biblical wisdom into their practice. And the head of that is a guy named Ron Blue. And Ron had asked me to be a coach for Kingdom Advisors. This is the short story. The long story is in the book. But there was a moment, he was mentoring me. I love what you were saying, Tom, about Paul and Timothy. He was kind of Paul and I was Timothy. And he was discipling me. And one day, toward the end of our discipleship time, he said, you know, Jeff, everything I start gets bigger and better after I leave. You know, he was one of these classic visionaries. Rarely the visionary is the operator, and he would tell you that he's not the operator, he's the visionary. And so I had this moment of clarity from God in that moment after sort of years of doing this with clients where God said, I want you to scale what this guy started. I mean, literally, like, I don't get like the voice of God speaking to me very often, and it wasn't a voice. It was like the still, small, quiet voice in your head, but it was very distinct. It's exactly what he said. And I think I literally looked over both shoulders like, well, maybe there's somebody here that knows how to execute on that vision. And I remember saying to God, because I was on all these committees at Morgan Stanley about, you know, listening to the advisors, what we should do to improve, and they never really listened to me. It's okay. It was a big ship, hard to turn. So I had all these opinions about how firms should be run, but I knew I'd never scaled anything. And so, and I remember telling God, sounds like fun, but you got the wrong guy because I have no clue how to scale anything. And I remember him saying to me, just that same whisper, that's why I'm picking you, because you can't take any credit. Everybody else also knows you can't do it. So I'll do it. Just wake up tomorrow and take instructions. So that was in 2010. So for the last 10 years, I've just been following that vision, and that was kind of the third aha moment, was to scale something that Ron had started, a new firm with a new idea. And so right after that, so I've only started the firm 4 years ago. So in those interim 6 years, I had started something called the Christian Focus Group at Morgan Stanley. And we got it up to about 600 members. And every day I was getting a phone call or an email from one of them saying, how do I build a God-honoring practice at this firm? And that was my favorite topic. I'd talk to them for like 90 minutes or 2 hours. And finally, the team would come in and go, hey, you don't have 2 hours to talk to these people every day. So I was praying about it. And that's when I wrote the book, was to just tell that story of what God's done through my life, and just been so generous to me to take me from a place of emptiness, of chasing what the world tells you to chase, to a place of pouring into others and thinking as a steward, not an owner, and pouring into other advisors. And it's just completely revolutionized my life. Same exact business. Tom and I were talking earlier about this. I'm in the same exact business, but instead of being miserable, now I'm absolutely joyous in what I do. So it's just, I'm just one beggar telling another beggar where they got bread.
Right on. That is so good. So I love that you were able to, that you frame that discontent as an aha. I mean, because it's easy just to look at that discontent as a funk, as I'm just not there yet. And to, you know, in the beginning of your book, in fact, I mean, that kind of discontent is almost predictable for us. And in the beginning of your book, you actually quote the 60 Minutes interview, the 60 Minutes TV show interview with Tom Brady, where in being interviewed after whichever Super Bowl victory it was, I can't remember.
I know.
But he's like, there's got to be something more than this. Here he's at the top of his game. It's a different game, but he's at the top and he's got the same stirring, the same funk. But to see that as an aha moment is a thing of great advantage. And I love the way you've stepped it on. I also love the way you describe yourself as like God said, do this. And you're like, I can't. And I just thought, oh, you're in such good company, because I think he did the very same thing with Moses, right? Like, you're the man, Mo, and then I can't. Yeah, well, let's go. So that's great.
Yeah, he always, if you feel like God's telling you to do something and you feel ill-equipped to do it, he knows he will empower you to do it. That's the cool thing. And he always uses the underdog, right? He always made the crowd smaller, used the person with the least skills. You know, Moses had a stutter and wasn't a good speaker. So yeah, that's a great point.
Good. Hey, before I ask you the next question, one thing I neglected to mention a minute ago is that if any of the guys out there have questions for Jeff, down on your Zoom toolbar, the Q&A button, you can type in a question, and we'll probably get to all of them. But if you have one, send it in, and we'll try to get to a few of those at the end. Okay. So here's my next question for Jeff. You mentioned Peter Forbes a minute ago, and there are a number of guys that you highlight in telling your story of the way that different men spoke into your life, and you use the expression that you then conclude that life is a team sport. That's maybe not an easy thing for a singles tennis player.
Correct.
Right? That life is a team sport. Tell us what you meant by that, and how some of these guys were instrumental in your life. You already talked about that about Peter, but maybe some of the other things, or how you had to adjust to receive from other guys.
Yeah. So we have 12 principles at Archetype, and one of them is life is a team sport. Probably after steward, you're a steward, not an owner, is probably my favorite. Probably my second favorite is life is a team sport. And that's especially profound for me, Tom, just because of exactly what you told me. This sort of singles player mentality, while it helped me sort of succeed in the early days of the wealth advisory business, it's not a great mentality for the rest of life. And the first thing I think of, Tom, is marriage, right? If you're a singles player in marriage, that is a formula for problems. And so I got that T-shirt as well, trying to, think about maybe what was best for me, not so much what was best for her. And it's amazing how when you really try to set up your teammate and think about your teammates more than yourself, the team starts winning more, right? So I am just completely obsessed with working in teams, and Ecclesiastes 4:12, right? I mean, it's a classic line. A cord of three strands is not easily broken, right? And it's funny that you were talking about, I didn't know you were going to talk about Paul and Timothy. I love that you were talking about that at the top, because I wrote that down too. Paul, and then there's, so Paul's a teacher, right? Timothy's the hungry to learn, the mentee, if you will. And then remember Barnabas, right? Barnabas is the guy that walks along with them and encourages them. He's sort of a peacemaker, an encourager, all of those things. And so I just think about all of these people I've had that have been, Paul's to me as Timothy. Bob Buford wrote a book called Halftime when I was having that emptiness. Even though I didn't know Bob personally, his books really helped me just understand that, hey, wait, maybe I could be in ministry in business. That never even crossed my mind before. As I told you, I had to kind of stink and thinking about that only the pastors are really in ministry. And then Peter Forbes helped connect me with all kinds of resources that helped me get better. Ron Blue, I've stood on his shoulders. He's taught me everything he knows about implementing biblical wisdom into the money business. And then, I know you had Terry Looper on, right? A couple of weeks ago. Terry's book, Sacred Pace. He's been, Terry's been generous mentoring me one-on-one. So I've just been the beneficiary, and I still am, of all kinds of Paul's mentors. And then I try to do the same. I try to find other Timothy. So I'm always seeking input from other men. And I'm also trying to mentor other people. So I have lots of advisors at our firm, and actually just in the community around the country and in this city that I mentor, and just try to help them avoid some of the potholes that I've stepped in. So hopefully, as I stand on Ron's shoulders, hopefully they'll stand on my shoulders and others and do even better. So those are a few of the ways I think about teams. And then we're obsessed about that inside the company. Everybody works as a team, not a solo practitioner. And I think that's the future of the business, but that's more of an industry discussion.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's great. These principles are so powerful. So So let's just think the guys watching, we have a bunch of folks out here watching today. If there's a guy out there who's going, yeah, I've got this sense of stirring going on, but you can't sit down personally with everybody, and you don't have a chance to hear every person's story personally. So is there kind of a pathway or a starting point or a process that you might say, do this?
I really like that question, Tom. It's not an easy question, right? Because everybody's at a different place.
Yeah.
And the number one thing is, I sort of prayed about that and what to say to folks. The number one thing I would say is trust that feeling. Trust that feeling. And I like what you said earlier, Tom. You said, is this just a passing phase? It's probably not. If you have that stirring, I mean, that's how God speaks to you. He creates discomfort often. And if you're like me, I didn't even know what the problem was. I thought, hey, I'm a pretty good person. I wouldn't have told you I'm super greedy and I'm addicted to material things, and I am putting money before God. That's my problem. I wouldn't have told you that when I was 32. But that's what God revealed to me over time. And if I did anything right, the only thing I did right was trying to solve the problem, figure out the root of the problem. So my encouragement is to trust that feeling of discomfort there, and we know that there's a God-sized hole in everybody's heart, and I tried to stuff it with material things. Maybe you're trying to stuff it with that or something else. God will provide the filling for that thing. And so I would just say, me nor anyone else is going to talk you into becoming a believer if you're not, or a follower of Jesus. But all I encourage people to do is trust that feeling. And if you need to read the Case for Christ to understand the truth of the Bible before you dive into the Bible, do it. But as soon as you can get to a place where you're just seeking God's wisdom for that discontent, get in a Bible study. I mean, Toolbox is perfect. You're going to have an opportunity after this call to join one of those. And halftime helped me. So if you're a business person kind of feeling like, look, halftime is just a euphemism for the midlife crisis. Okay, sometimes people have them at 30, some people have them at 60. But if you're kind of feeling that angst about what's it all about, that's a great book to read. If my book helps you trading up, that would be great. I'm just, again, one beggar showing another beggar where they got food, and halftime's kind of about selling the company and then looking for significance. My book's a little more about how do you have ministry in your business along the way. Mm-hmm. And then Sacred Pace. I can't more highly recommend a book than Sacred Pace. Terry Luper's book was huge on how do you make decisions. Okay, now you want to do things in a different manner. How do you hear from God and make decisions with God? And I love what Terry says. He says, he goes, I have an unfair advantage. All of us that sort of trust God to make our decisions for us, we have an unfair advantage in the business world and every aspect of life. We got the author of the universe who'll tell us the actual answer to our questions. And so, but just doing it in a way that gets us neutral and listens to the right kind of voices and looks at the right kind of analysis. So number one, trust that voice. Number two, pursue God's answer for that. Even if you're not a believer, just keep investigating, and the answers 100% are available. And for me, the thing that I just love is, I think about, Ephesians 2:10, right? God is already, we're designed by God, made in Christ Jesus, and he has already prepared amazing works for us to do. So all we got to do is ask God what those works are and wake up in the morning and take orders. So that is my number one thing for everybody, is just having a vision that there are amazing things in store for you. Your job is just to ask the right questions and get on that right path. And I just can't wait to hear from people. That's my number one thing, is having that alignment. So the reason we had to create our own company was to have perfect alignment. God was telling us to do something and communicate in a certain way. We just weren't able to do it. I always said, we could get maybe 50% of it done at the big firms. And finally, he gave us enough discomfort there where we set up our own. And people always ask me the first year or two, how's the new company? And I said, I'm an old math guy. So I'm like, we were getting 50% of what we wanted to get done. Now, if we can get closer to 100%, maybe it'll be twice as much fun. Tom, that's the way I said. And the surprise has been that it is exponentially more fun to get perfectly aligned with God's will for your life. So the first thing you got to do is discern it. And then the second thing you got to do is execute and go get it. And the joy that I have in that alignment versus unaligned is just, it's night and day.
That is great. And guys out there, Jeff just sort of recited, 4, 5, 6 different tools, and I'll include those in our next email just so that you have those in print, and you'll know what to grab and to read, and some other little tools that might help along those lines. Okay. Well, one more question for you, Jeff, and thank you for your time. 2020 has obviously been a year of surprise, and things are flurrying back up again now with the COVID stuff. And so that looks like maybe it's not all done yet, and a lot of uncertainty, and it can be frightening. And I recently tuned in and heard you talking in another webinar about moving from fear to faith. Okay. Tell us a little bit about what you mean by that, how you do that kind of personally, if you feel those times flickering up with the uncertainties kind of nipping at your heels, and how do you handle that time?
I think it's a great question at any time, but especially at this time where there's so much uncertainty and there's so much anxiety out there. I mean, we're seeing it in our client base, and we experience it ourselves. And I think back to other times I've been fearful, too, in particular. I think about, when God said, start communicating with your clients about my wisdom. I was really scared about talking to folks about this. And so I just started keeping a little journal. I had some people that were walking alongside me, and they just said, hey, start keeping a journal and start writing things down as you do them. And then the other thing was starting the firm. There's a lot of fear around starting a brand new company, and will the clients come, and all of those kind of things. And the thing that's helped me kind of get past that, and I think we can acknowledge the fear, but we can't stay in fear. I mean, there are so many verses in the Bible. Just Google Bible verses about fear, and you'll get a list. I've heard there's 365 verses on fear, right? One for every day. And it's always be strong and courageous, God says. So God's word will absolutely back you up to have courage. And the story that just keeps coming to my mind when I think about fear is Peter getting out of the boat, right? The big storm's hitting, Peter's fishing with the other disciples, and Jesus just comes out in the water, walking on the water, and says, hey, Peter, come to me. And Peter gets out of the boat, and as long as his eyes are on Christ, he's walking on water, right? Defying all fear. And as soon as he starts looking down at the waves, he starts sinking. And I can't think of a better visual of just keeping our eyes on Jesus and not worrying about the waves around us. That is supernatural, that God gives us that ability not to focus on the waves, but on him and his promises. And I just keep coming back to that Ephesians verse of all the great things he has in store for you, already prepared. Just walk into them. Keep your eyes on that prize, not on the choppy water.
Oh, that's beautiful. Let me give you a couple of our written in questions here real quick. And I know that some guys are going to have to head back out to the work duties, but a couple of the questions are similar, and you may have just touched on them. One said, how has your advisory business prospered since you decided to tell your clients that they don't own their money, that God does? And a sort of related question in the other direction says, have you ever followed a course that you thought was in tune with the calling God had for you, only that it didn't work out, that it fell flat, or you went the wrong way? And what'd you do in those instances?
Yeah, I'd say from a business standpoint, in God's economy, he can do whatever he wants with what he tells you to do. What I would say is, I don't have a prosperity gospel mindset, but sometimes God will choose to prosper you on this earth. I think by following his principles, he will prosper you in the sense of joy in all circumstances.
I love it.
But he doesn't always do it financially. In my case, he actually did both. I think a lot of it was just to kind of prove to me that his way was the best way, and he knows that I was a scorecard keeper of those things, and so he spoke to me uniquely in that way. But you know, right after I walked into my branch manager's office and said, "Hey, I'm supposed to tell all these people their money isn't their money. This thing's probably going to collapse," and I just had to get okay with it. I'm like, "Okay, it's just all going to fold. It's going to be a nightmare." What I found is, while the world would tell you that telling people to be more generous and that leads to joy, that was a secret for me. That once I couldn't just become more generous by myself. I had to get to a place where I understood God owned it all, and that, wow, wasn't I lucky to keep what he allowed me to spend on myself and my family, as opposed to, kind of had a requirement, give a certain percentage away. And so, but for me, as we started having those conversations with clients, we started attracting people who wanted to have that kind of conversation. They weren't around a team of people who were, encouraging them, giving them oxygen to execute on the plan God had put in their head. A lot of people around them were saying, well, you don't want to be that generous. You don't want to give the company away. You don't want to sell, why would you give that much money away is something a lot of, advisors say. And we were saying the opposite. Oh, great. And then we'd give them unique tools. And so the business actually grew. And, but more importantly, the joy was there. And I have absolutely, to the second question, gone on a path. One thing, it might seem small, but I think it's okay. Even during this period where I was trying to have all these conversations, we had a referral from a very strong believer, and I just assumed that the family he referred would also be strong believers. So the first phone call, I'm kind of going down the path of God owns it all, and we're just stewards, and I'm just assuming he's tracking, and I get done, and there's this really awkward silence, and the guy says, well, anyway, I respect what you believe, but I don't really think that way. And so I had definitely overshot where he was kind of on the spiritual spectrum. But one of the things I learned from that was he really did. We still had a great relationship. And so being a little too bold sometimes, if it's coming from the right place and it's genuine, you're not going to blow up those relationships. So I think some people may be feeling like, how do I step out and take that first step? Tom, I like what you said about, like, what's the first step you could take? Even if you step in it a little bit, God's got your back, and he can use that to open another conversation or something else. So as long as you're trying to put one foot in front of the other, they're not all going to be perfect. But he can use them all to move you in the right direction and teach you some lessons along the way.
That is great. Thank you, man. Jeff, thanks for this. I appreciate you being generous with your time and your experience with us here today. I know we had a couple more questions written in, but I'll get a response to those and send them out to you, fellas who sent those in. And I know we need to let folks get back to work. So Jeff, thanks again for being here today. We sure appreciate it, and just look forward to talking again sometime.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks, Tom, and thanks everybody for the airtime.